We have with us Jay, or Seelan Okan, who is our co-presenter today, and we're very lucky to have her on the board of Leep. So Jay is doing her Masters of Research she's done her Masters of Research and doing her PhD in psychology. She is a clinical psychologist and she specializes in working with older people and has done some research in the areas of the role of technology and older people in isolation, and she's going to talk about mental health and some other really interesting topics today. We're going to talk about the rights of older people. So one benefit of having a rights-based approach is that we can understand the baseline of what everybody deserves and has the right to have in terms of having a quality life and having all of their needs met. So I just want to spend a minute looking at some of the legal rights and human rights that people have and looking at how we might get further information if we're not sure. So the government has a human rights website, which is where this information is from if you want to look it up later. And some of the common challenges faced by older people, we can start with workplace discrimination. So as some people here might even have experienced themselves, it can be age discrimination can be something that is a real challenge for people in today's society, and after COVID and with the increase of the need for technology and literacy in that space, we do see some discrimination for older people, and that's something that we need to be aware that people can be protected against. Also, the balance of paid work and caring responsibilities. People, need to be able to have a choice in terms of how they spend their time and helping family and looking after children or grandchildren. This is something that can be a challenge for older people in Australia and in other countries. Access to appropriate and adequate care facilities and healthcare. So we know, and there's been a lot of attention and inquiries into this space, especially with the start of COVID-19, it kind of highlighted this area and it kind of brought it to the attention of people how important that quality of care is, and that can be quite challenging. You'll have to forgive the background noise. I'm really sorry. There's some construction happening in my building, so I'm sorry if it's a bit noisy in my background. And of course, abuse. So we've seen that people can face financial abuse and manipulation, and there's a lot of there was a government inquiry into this space, so that's another area where it's really important that we know what people's rights are and to make sure that their physical and psychological well-being is protected. And we also see people experiencing homelessness. That can be really challenging, and a dependence on Centrelink or social security, and it can be hard to find appropriate housing for someone who is older and experiencing homelessness, and also barriers to accessing government services and other opportunities. So if you're interested in learning more about those rights, there's lots of good resources out there, and we'll share some at the end as well. Can just go to the next slide. Thank you. So in terms of legislation, the main legislation that I wanted to mention today was the Aged Care Act, which talks about diversity and discrimination, but also regulation of funding and providers and quality care. And the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission is a body that make sure that these rules and regulations and laws are followed. And then we also have the United Nations Principles for Older Persons. And that's something that is a global instrument that, we can use as a tool to refer back to as well. And I thought it was interesting to highlight that around 15% of the Australian population is over 65, so 3.7 million people. So this is a large portion of our society. So I think it's, and you know, we've got an aging population as well, so this number is going to increase. So I think it's great that everyone here today is prioritising learning about working with older people, and it's really important. So thank you for being here to do that. Okay, so I'm just going to hand over to Jay now. So she's going to take us through what she'll cover. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Okay, so my name's Jay, and as Lauren kindly introduced me at the very beginning, I am a psychologist, a registered psychologist. I'm also a doctoral student at Western Sydney University, and I am specialising in my research in older persons' mental health. And what I do is actually research on the benefits, so the emotional and psychological benefits of being active on social media. So that's part of my studies and what I do. I'll be going into quite a bit of my research knowledge and my clinical and practical knowledge as well in these slides. There are some areas that I'm not an expert in, but we've added them in because of some of your feedback based on the questions that we asked a couple of weeks ago. So there will be, I will be talking about social health of older adults. So that's obviously my area. The psychological and emotional well-being of older adults, also the cognitive health, spiritual well-being, and some vulnerabilities as well. So in terms of social health, and in terms of being social, it's basically communicating with others, and we can do this in various ways, such as talking face-to-face, we can talk over the phone, we can communicate through messaging, through group chats, and through activities as well. So these are really important to our health because as humans, we're very social creatures. So in this section, I'll be discussing some social strategies for seniors, so really specific to seniors, as well as going into a very broad overview into the recent research and data that's relevant to why this is a very important part of overall health of seniors and why we should take this seriously. So I was actually really glad to hear that some of you, as a result of that breakout room that we just did about 5 minutes ago, said the importance of being online and online social health benefits. So in terms of social networking and social media, so that's being involved online in various platforms. And there are some very significant benefits to that. So one of the first benefits is staying connected with loved ones. So we find in research that seniors who are connected on Facebook, who do have WhatsApp, who do have Messenger, who do use FaceTime, they also report a stronger sense of belongingness. So they feel like they belong within their family and their friend structures. And they also have a much stronger sense of place within their family and friend networks. So what we find is that they report, being that matriarch or the patriarch of the family, for example, so people go to them to ask for things. There's also memory and cognitive benefits of networking as we grow older. So some studies have found that there is an increased inhibitory control in social media users aged over 65. And what that means is they're actually able to ignore irrelevant stimuli. So it's much like as you're reading or flicking through, for example, a timeline, you're able to process out the stimuli that's not really relevant to you and really focus on the stimuli or the information that's really interesting or relevant to you. So this a tool or this skill seems to be improved in older adults who use social media. And there's also improved global cognition and overall executive functioning. So things like your memory, your working memory, short-term memory, processing speed, and visuospatial abilities in older adults who use social media. And the third benefit is that it actually does connect us intergenerationally. So older adults on social media can connect with their grandchildren. They can also connect with younger generations, so like your nieces and nephews. And this also reduces the sense of social isolation as well as depression levels. So there are some studies that have looked at depressed cohorts, so seniors who do have depression, and their depression rates actually reduced after using social media or Facebook because it connected them with people who were important to them. So this is actually a study that I'm running at the moment on the back of Wu and Chu in 2020. And what I'm doing is actually teaching some older adults how to use Instagram at the moment. And that's what they're saying. So my participants are saying that, oh, I can actually connect with my grandchildren. And, you know, if usually I only get to see them once a month, then I can actually have a nightly chat with them or comment on their photos much more frequently. So it's definitely a positive benefit. So this slide here shows us which social media platforms seniors are more likely to use. So with the figure on the left, in a study conducted by Care Connect recently, a total of 829 surveys were conducted both online and over the phone. And they found that almost all of the seniors that they surveyed had used the internet at some point of their life. So 99% of people had used the internet. And seniors use the internet for various things, such as online banking. So 32% used it all the time, and 60% used it a lot of the time for online banking. And they also, 65% also reported using social media. Then when we look at the research that's come out of the US, which is the figure on the right, this shows us that seniors are more likely to use Facebook than any other social media application, such as Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn. Both of these studies also predicted, so they were a couple of years ago, but both of them predicted that by 2020, there will be more than 50 million seniors on social media platforms. That is a lot of people. And that figure, there's no current research at the moment on how many are actually online using social media, but I would think it's actually a lot more than that. And the reason why is because with COVID, a lot of, in a lot of countries, particularly in Europe, in America, people have been forced into lockdowns and quarantine. So they're very socially isolated. So this has been a bit of a silver lining, so to speak, to reconnect seniors with the outside world and with their friends and family. So I do believe that it's probably more than 50 million, but we don't have stats on that yet. So it'll be really interesting to see in the next couple of years what happens in this space. And obviously Leep has lots of programs to help seniors with that too. So next topic here is how social engagement keeps seniors' mind healthy. So why should they use social media? I think it's a very relevant question. So firstly, social activities, they provide cognitive stimulation. They help keep our brain working. They help keep our brain stimulated. We're thinking, we're using all our cognitive tools, and different parts of our brain are engaging with each other. It also enhances or improves our mood. So we feel better when we're socially connected with people and when we're engaging with people. And it can also provide opportunities to share skills and expertise. So if you've had a conversation with someone, you know, that you might be talking about a particular topic, I'm not sure about your favorite flower, for example, and then you can say, oh, this is my favorite flower. And then the conversation goes on from there. So you can actually connect it to likes, dislikes, past experiences. And again, that engages different parts of the brain, including the memory system. There are research that suggests that higher social engagement and activity, so conversation as well as activity-based, so like groups or group work, they can reduce the risk of cognitive decline, and it might be a moderately protective factor for cognitive health as we age. So there are some good cognitive health benefits that can come from social engagement. The other side of this is that social isolation is very strongly linked to depression. So there's lots of research that show this connection, and I'll go into this a little bit more later. And obviously loneliness and depression are risk factors of suicide. So if we're looking at someone who's very lonely, very depressed, very down, very isolated, that's something that we also consider when we're assessing for risk of hurting or harming themselves in psychological practice. And supportive social relationships are a very strong predictor of healthy aging. So there's been lots of research and studies around this as well. And the findings overwhelmingly conclude that those who have stronger and very satisfying social relationships, either with their friends, with their family, with their children, with their grandchildren, they are more likely to age in a healthier way and a happier way. And as I said before, it's also connected with a sense of belongingness and purpose. So, you know, that there's a reason that they're around, they're useful to others, reduced rates of suicide and suicidal ideation, as well as an increased sense of inclusion and empowerment. So these are all studies that looked at social media and Facebook in particular. So in terms of, and this was a question that was posed a little bit before, I can't remember who by, but how do we encourage older people to stay socially engaged and connected? It is really difficult to motivate someone to do something that they really don't want to do, or they're not interested in, or they might be a little bit scared of it as well. So some ways to do it is to really call to, why do you want to do this? Why do I think you want to do this? Or why might this be helpful for you? So some ways that you can do that is through FaceTime or video chatting with family and friends. So, you know, you'll get to see your niece, your nephew, your grandson, your granddaughter, what they did at school today. You'll get to talk about that. So that could be the encouragement there. It could include scheduled virtual visits. This has been really popular actually in the past year and a half in people that I've been working with. So again, because of lockdowns and quarantines and family living overseas, so not being able to travel as well or interstate, what they've been doing is actually scheduling in virtual visits, as if you would turn up to your grandparents on a Saturday evening at 6 p.m, for example, for dinner. People have been organising exactly the same thing using FaceTime or WhatsApp or some other group chat form of mechanism. Which I've already mentioned before, being active on Facebook increases a sense of connectedness. So encouraging them to join Facebook, and there are a lot of resources on how to do this, including with Leep. There's also some interest groups that they can find. So www.meetup.com.au for the Australian version is a fantastic website and a resource tool to meet like-minded people and groups. And you can also search by geographical area as well as by key interest points. I really like this one. It's for all ages, all interests. So you can find, there's some really interesting ones on here. There's like Chocolate Appreciation Society, where they get together and they talk about chocolate. There's walking groups that you can find. So you can find them in your local area where everybody gets together, goes for a walk all together, and then that's it. You know, you can have something social, go out for a coffee afterwards perhaps, or go home. There's language-based groups on this as well. So German speaking, French speaking, musical interests, perhaps pop culture interests, so like Harry Potter groups or Star Trek or Star Wars. So it's a really fantastic way of meeting like-minded people. And you can also restrict it to age interests as well. Another thing that they can do is to complete a course or take a class. So again, the purpose here is to keep the mind active, keep the brain active, keep learning, keep improving and learning new things. So you can do that through Leep programs. There's also the Wesley School for Seniors. They have many, many different programs on offer as well, including things like dance classes, knitting, sewing, computers, all different things. There's also some online community-based discussion groups as well that you can join. So this one here is a UK group, but it is open to Australians as well. Some of my participants use it. It's www.seniorchatters.co.uk. And again, you can find interest groups based on what you're looking for as well. For example, like a women's only or a men's only, or again, you know, whatever your needs are there. Some other things that you can encourage an older person or a senior to do, or for yourself to do, is to volunteer your time or expertise. So something that happens in older, typically retirement or you know, or ending of the work career, and we dedicate a lot of our time and a lot of our effort to our work career. So for a lot of people, that's very difficult, that transition to not working anymore. So actually volunteering time or expertise through something like a community garden, or volunteering to mentor disadvantaged children, for example, can be really helpful in, again, keeping your mind active, but also having that sense of purpose still. There's another really fantastic program called Adopt a Grandchild or Grandparent. If you haven't heard of this, it's a really fantastic program run by careforkids.com.au. And it was started by someone who didn't have their parent around to grandparent their child. So the idea here is that children who don't have grandparents, biological grandparents, and older people who don't have family members, so who don't have grandchildren and who yearn for that connection, they can put up profiles. It's kind of like a dating app, but what they do is they put up the profiles of who they are, what they like as people. And the profiles are matched based on those shared common interests. And they can also connect with each other by sharing messages. So this is a great way at setting up a relationship, like a bit of a care relationship that is both beneficial for children, so the grandchild, as well as for the senior or the grandparent. Another thing that they can do is get creative. So you can surprise a loved one or a friend with a handwritten card or a letter, because I'm sure, you know, most of us don't receive handwritten letters or cards in the mail these days. And other things that are really important, and I'll go into why a little bit later on, is playing games, again, to keep your mind engaged and active. So things like crosswords, Sudoku, chess, solitaire, and puzzles. You can do all of those online. So that's why it's a great way of being socially engaged and connected. You can play with your friends online. So through the games apps on Facebook, perhaps, or even things like Word with Friends or Candy Crush and things like that. So great way to keep the brain active, but also be socially engaged too, and get a bit competitive with each other. So here I'll be talking about psychological and emotional well-being. This is a very large and very rich area in terms of the enormous amount of research, as well as in the resources that I can actually share as well. But we are limited with time, obviously, and with the scope. So today I'll be focusing on a few key areas, such as grief, loss, and transition. And we'll also be talking a bit about depression, loneliness, and suicide in older age. So I just want to give a bit of a trigger warning. We will be discussing suicide in older age in a couple of slides. We'll also be having a group discussion about a case example. And we'll utilize the breakout rooms to do that again. So, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there is, you know, when it comes to ending our career, and, you know, a career generally is something that lasts 30, 40 years. That's a long time of our life. That's such an investment of our time, of ourself, you know, physically. For a lot of people, that would be physically, emotionally, mentally, cognitively. So when we stop working, and when we stop having that relationship of, you know, feeling important and feeling like we're doing something that's important, that's a huge loss and a huge transition into retirement, which for some people is doing nothing. So having that really different, that dichotomous difference between, you know, working full-time and then retiring and completely stopping, that might not necessarily be healthy. So what I usually see in clinical practice is what we call grief and loss associated with this life transition of retirement. And it's usually got to do with the ending of a career. And that usually means that there's the loss of working or professional relationships. So for people who've been in the workforce for a long period of time, you know, you do invest a lot of time and a lot of effort, and you create these wonderful relationships with people at work. And when you stop working, that can activate a level of grief, because you no longer have those professional relationships. And sometimes because of time pressures and everybody's busy and things become really difficult, those relationships kind of slow down and then don't continue on. So there is a lot of grief and loss associated with this transition. And for a lot of older people, having more time and less commitments also means that there's, you know, they're at this phase where they don't know what to do. There's nothing to do and there's nothing to look forward to. So this is usually combined with decreasing physical health or having impacted mobility or agility. And when we find, you know, when that typically happens together, we'd be looking more deeply at if there's a bit of depression going on as well, possibly. We also have to remember that at this stage, part of the human condition where, you know, we're all growing older, and unfortunately that means some people do pass away, whether that be by disease or age or for various different reasons. So for a lot of people in this phase of life, this later phase of life, they do experience the death of loved ones, including friends and family members. And the rate of illness also increases with age. So for all these various reasons, and it doesn't have to be all of them, it can be a couple of them as well, we tend to see a lot of grief and loss associated with this phase of life. So it's thought that between 10 and 15% of older people, and I'll just remind you guys that for the statistic that Lauren put up a bit before, that in Australia at the moment there's about 3.5 million older people, so aged over 65. So psychologists think that between 10 and 15% of older people experience depression, and about 10% experience anxiety. So when we look at the stat, that's about 350,000 people. That's a lot of people. And the rates of depression among people living in residential aged care, so nursing homes and aged care homes, are believed to be much higher. The psychologists do predict, again, this is a prediction, not an exact figure, but they think that it's somewhere around 35%. And these stats are from the National Institute of Aging. So depression is a common problem among older adults, but it's not a normal part of aging, and that's a critical distinction. So in fact, studies show that most older adults feel satisfied with their lives, despite having more illnesses or physical problems. So even though they're physically unable to do things that they used to do, most of the time they're still happy and they're okay with that, they're content with that. However, if important life changes happen as we get older and these cause feelings of uneasiness, stress, or sadness, so for example, having the death of a loved one and then moving from work into retirement, and then also being diagnosed with a serious disease or an illness and then having to deal with that as well, that can also, those factors can trigger that depression response. So after a period of adjustment, many older adults can regain their emotional balance again. So they, you know, most older adults are quite resilient to these things, but others don't come back from this, and that's where they can develop depression. So I've put up here on the slides the symptoms and the symptom checklist for depression, which is from the diagnostic manual. So some things to look out for, and these are things that if you're working with an older person, if you observe any of these things, this is basically, you know, signs that the person is either depressed or developing depression. So you've got to do something about it. So one of the most common symptoms is a persistent, sad, anxious, or empty mood. So it's not necessarily always feeling down, always feeling blue, always feeling low. It might also look like numbness or feeling nothing at all. You know, I don't feel anything, not motivated, not happy, but, you know, just meh or bleh. So this emptiness. There's also feelings of hopelessness, guilt, sometimes worthlessness, and helplessness. And more recent studies are showing that these factors are actually more critical than we once believed when it comes to things like suicide or self-harm. There's also an impact on how they respond to things. So an increased sense of irritability, restlessness, or having trouble sitting still. So increased energy. There also might be a loss of interest in once pleasurable activities, including things like sex, including things like social activities, including things like activities that they really enjoyed. There's also there could be a decreased energy or fatigue, so it could be either or. Moving or talking more slowly is another common one. And as well as having some cognitive impacts, so difficulty with concentration, memory, and decision making, not being able to kind of think straight. Sleep issues is also very common, so difficulty falling or staying asleep, waking up very early, or oversleeping, not being able to get out of bed. And when we think of, as we get older, our body needs more sleep as well. This is where it becomes a little bit difficult to discern whether it's depression or a normal part of aging. So if there's quite a few of these that you notice, it's probably more along the lines of depression. Other changes can be to the appetite, so eating more or eating less than usual, not having an appetite, not feeling hungry. And it'll also be characterized by unplanned weight gain or loss. There's also, in some cases, thoughts of death or suicide attempts. And I'll go into that a little bit more in the next slide. So just a trigger warning here, if this affects you, please mute or go away for 5 minutes and come back, because I'll be going into this a little bit deeper. The other thing that you'll notice, they complain of aches and pains, or they feel achy and painful in certain areas. Headaches are really common because of the tension. Cramps or digestive, that it seems like gastrointestinal issues, but it's not necessarily that. So lots of diarrhea or constipation is also really common. And frequent crying is also a very common symptom. So next I'm going to go into some stats about suicide in older age. So in Australia, as part of the most recent Bureau of Statistics survey, this might be a very surprising and shocking figure to some of you. Men aged 85 and above actually have the highest overall rate of suicide in Australia. It's not young people, it's older people, particularly men over the age of 85. They are the highest represented group. So this is obviously quite alarming and very worrying. And we think that it's due to quite a few different reasons, not just one. So we think it's a combination of depression, so being depressed or having depression, maybe having a history of depression, or that being a new thing. It's also combined usually with social isolation, being physically or geographically isolated. So if family have moved away, for example, or they're living quite remotely and their family have moved to the city. If there's been the loss of their loved one, so their wife usually, or their life partner. And this also means a loss of that sense of place and purpose and belonging within their family and the friend structure as well. It also seems to coincide with a sense of being a burden on people. So This is what we call perceived burdensomeness. It's a big word, but what it basically means is they feel that they're a burden on others. So others need to constantly check in on them, take care of them, look after them. We think that that's one of the major reasons of why this statistic is so overrepresented. And the other reason, and this is a very new area of exploration, is for the reasons of exploitation and vulnerability. So as we grow older, in certain cases, our vulnerability also increases. And unfortunately, in some cases, that means that your family members or carers can actually exploit the older person. It's really awful. I'll be going into this a little bit more all the way at the end of the presentation. But we do think that it's one of another contributing reason as to why men over 85 in particular have a very high suicide rate across all age and sex groups in Australia. We're going to talk, or I'm going to talk about cognitive health. So this is another extremely important factor in the overall well-being of seniors. And we'll be discussing some conditions to do with the brain. So I'm just presenting a very broad overview, mainly because we had a lot of questions about this area, particular to dementia. So I have included some of that information in my slides, but it isn't my expert area. So I'm just giving you a heads up. All right. So in terms of cognitive health and what it is, it's often described as two types of words. So staying sharp or being in the right mind. And it's defined as living to an advanced age, having good physical health, having a positive mental outlook, being alert, having a good memory, and being socially involved. So it actually involves a lot of different things and different factors. And genetic, environmental, and lifestyle factors are all thought to influence cognitive health. So there's quite a few things that interact here that make a difference to if we're cognitively healthy or unhealthy later on in life. So some of these factors may contribute to a decline in thinking skills and ability to perform everyday tasks, such as driving, paying bills, taking medicine, and cooking. So one of the conditions as part of this is dementia. It's classified as a group of conditions, so it's not necessarily a disease or an illness, but a group of conditions characterized by impairment of at least 2 brain functions, such as memory loss or loss of judgment. And the symptoms include forgetfulness, limited social skills, and thinking abilities, so impaired that it interferes with daily functioning. So it makes a difference to how a person can function in their day-to-day life through really simple aspects, such as making decisions and talking to people and communicating what it is that they're trying to ask for example. Medication and therapies may help to manage some of the symptoms. And the early signs of dementia are often very subtle and vague, and they might not immediately be obvious or noticeable. So this is obviously a problem in terms of early detection and early intervention. Some common symptoms may include progressive and frequent memory loss, so forgetting things, not being able to recall things, significant events, people, faces. It can be confusion. So a good example of this is if they went to a shopping centre and they drove to the shopping centre, but then they caught a bus back home because they forgot that they actually drove to the shopping centre. There's some personality changes there. So they might, their likes and their dislikes might change, or their characteristics might also change. Apathy and withdrawal is also a common symptom. So that's being very detached, being very disengaged, uninvolved, as well as the loss of ability to perform everyday tasks. And there are different types of dementia as well. So as I said, this is not my expert area, but there are lots of experts in this area within Australia. And the main resource for this is Dementia Australia. So they can connect you with many, many other fantastic resources, location-based and specific need-based as well if you need to, if you contact their helpline. So some strategies on how we protect our cognitive health, because it's obviously a very important thing. Our brain is how we function, how we move, how we think, how we do things. So we do need to protect it and make sure that that's healthy. So one thing that we can do is engage that memory system. So what we can do is remember conversations with others. This can boost our memory performance. And there has been some research into this on reminiscing about conversations or past experiences with loved ones. So what you can do is with your partner, so your wife, your husband, or your spouse, children perhaps, go through old memories and try to recall really specific details. What was that person wearing? Where were you? What time was it? Was it morning or nighttime? So being able to bounce off, these memories and talk about it with each other tends to boost memory performance and increase that recall. Another way is obviously staying social and being in the company of others. So stay socially engaged. I can't push this enough. It's so important. Playing games like puzzles, crosswords, and card games. Again, that activates different parts of the brain areas. So really important to keep it functioning, keep it working. If you don't have anybody to talk to, you can go through photo albums, and based on what that photo is, you can recall details from that memory and from the past. So again, where were you at the time? What year was it? What month was it? What season was it? They're really important details. And again, it's important to invoke the memory system and to keep that recall going. You can learn a new language. It's never too late, never too late. So you can pick up on a new language, one that you've perhaps always wanted to learn, or maybe something to do with your ancestry. You can take up a new sport. You can use or play or learn a musical instrument. You can also learn a new hobby or pick up a new hobby, such as painting, sewing, woodwork, and cooking. And many of these things or these activities can be related to my previous slides, things like meetup.com, Wesley School for Seniors, Leep programs. There's all different programs available and resources available for this. It just depends on what you're wanting to do and how much you're willing to do it. Something else that's really important is actually varying your daily activities. So if you wake up, it's not going to the shops at exactly the same time every day. It's not, picking up the phone and calling that particular person at the same time every day. It's varying that a little bit. Preparing dinner or doing something different. Not having too much of a plan, because that helps with, again, getting you thinking and getting you problem solving. Staying social, keeping in touch with friends, and making new ones through community activities. Again, there were some examples before. So that sense of belonging, that sense of having a purpose is really important here. Getting good quality sleep. So basic bodily functions, human functions like sleep, eating, so making sure you're nourishing your body with a healthy and varied diet. Super, super important to cognitive health. And keeping our body and heart healthy with exercise, and reducing other things like alcohol, smoking, obviously all that other kind of stuff as well. Really important to keep our brain healthy. And some other protective factors when it comes to aging is spirituality and religion. And obviously we've known about these ones for a very long time, but again, it's only very recently that research has really focused on these two things, or this one thing. They really combine it as being very important in psychology and as a protective factor. So how does spirituality play a role in keeping healthy as we age? I think it's a really good question. So firstly, religion is a specific set of organised beliefs and practices, and they're usually shared by a community or a group. So it's a shared thing, it's a group thing, and it's a very structured, it's a very specific set of beliefs. Spirituality is more of an individual practice. So it's about your relationship with either a higher figure or a spiritual figure. And it has to do with having a sense of peace and purpose. Both have been associated with healthy aging in many recent research studies. So one research study suggested that religion is actually correlated with improved physical and mental health. And religious people, so that the participants that they tested, they also asked them of, why do you think that, you know, after an injury you've recovered so quickly or you've recovered so well? And they've said things like, because God is watching over me, or because I have a good relationship with God, or they're spiritual, their intervention facilitates these benefits. So God helps me, you know, and he helps me through my rehab program, for example, or he helps me to get better and physically recover. Another point here is that having positive and hopeful attitudes about life and towards illnesses and disease also predicts improved health outcomes and lower mortality rates. So if you are positive and you're quite optimistic and hopeful that you're going to get better, things are going to get better, and things will improve, then they are more likely to improve as well. So it's a bit of a case of mind over matter. And, you know, thinking is equal to doing. A sense of meaning and a purpose in life. This is a really big one, and a bit of an up and coming research item. So we've recently discovered that this hugely affects health behaviours and social and family relationships. So if you're having that spirituality and that sense of religiousness and an increased sense of meaning and purpose, you're more likely to engage socially, and you're more likely to also engage in healthy behaviours like looking after yourself, not drinking, being physically active, exercising, checking in with others. So again, it's associated with other very healthy habits and behaviours, as well as for people with terminal illnesses or disabilities, it gives them a greater ability to cope. So with acceptance and with forgiveness and moving past things. And here I'm going to talk a bit about vulnerabilities. So as we grow older, our body and physical capabilities change. And this changes over our lifetime. So it's different, you know, when we're in our teenage years, it's different to when we get to our 20s. You know, we can party, we can stay out all night, we can not sleep over a 48-hour period, and that's okay. But then we hit our 30s and it's like, oh, I'm feeling it. You know, I need my sleep. I need to go to bed by 9 o'clock. But, and that keeps changing. So it's different in our 40s, in our 50s, in our 60s, 70s, and more so later on. So sometimes our emotional and psychological vulnerabilities can also change in response to these vulnerabilities too. So here I'll be going through some examples of elder abuse. And this is another big topic area in psychology at the moment and in the care of older persons, because it is quite prevalent. So if you're working with seniors in any capacity, there are certain things to keep an eye out for. It's everybody's obligation, and you know, it's everybody's duty of care. So there are things to keep an eye out for if you observe or you notice anything. But this also applies to, for example, so even if you're not working with people, your neighbours, you know, people next door, if you notice things, if you overhear things all the time, your own parents, if they tell you about things, or, you know, things that other people have done to them or said to them, or your grandparents. So I'll be going into that a little bit. And in terms of elder abuse, it's been defined by the CDC, so the Centres for Disease Control and Prevention, as an intentional act or failure to act that causes or creates a risk of harm to an older adult. And an older adult here is someone aged 60 or older. So the key here is it's intentional and it creates a risk of harm, or it causes a risk of harm. So there are different types. So there's physical abuse, and this is when an elder person experiences illness, pain, injury, functional impairment, distress, or death as a result of the intentional use of physical force, and includes acts such as hitting, kicking, pushing, slapping, and burning. Sexual abuse involves forced or unwanted sexual interaction of any kind with an older person. And this may also include unwanted sexual contact, or involving penetration or non-contact acts such as sexual harassment. Emotional or psychological abuse refers to verbal or non-verbal behaviours that inflict anguish, so mental pain, fear or distress on an older adult. And examples can include humiliation or disrespect, verbal and non-verbal threats, harassment, and geographic or interpersonal isolation. So like purposefully taking them away from the support group, for example, or purposefully moving them to a nursing home where they don't know anybody and it's not an appropriate environment for them. Neglect is the failure to meet an older adult's basic needs. So these needs include food, water, shelter, safety, clothing, hygiene, and essential medical care. So if they deny them their medication, for example, they don't fill their scripts, they don't take them to their doctor's appointments, that's neglect. Financial abuse is the illegal, unauthorised, and improper use of an elder's money, their benefits, their belongings, their property, or assets for the benefit of someone other than the older adult. And this is an up and coming research area, the financial abuse, because we're experiencing a lot more of that come through and a lot more reportings of that come through, most of the time perpetrated by their family members. So that's an up and coming area and something that all of us should look out for. So when it comes to reporting this, if you notice anything, if you observe anything, and if you want to do something about it, which we all should, there are so many resources and starting points, because, you know, you might hear something, you might be in a situation and you're like, I don't know what to do. What, you know, where are the first steps? What's my next steps? Your first step is to contact someone who can give you those resources or who can take that responsibility from you. So the Australian Human Rights Commission Elder Helpline, the number is there. They're a great first point of contact. In New South Wales, we have the Elder Abuse Helpline and Resource Unit, and their number is up there as well, 1800 628 221. There's also...
Hey, can I just interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you're on a roll. You're amazing. But let me say, as volunteers, I would suggest, like if they're our tech mates, they would contact our team and we would do this. And I would suggest that the other volunteers in this webinar or forum would go to their supervisors, because it's, you know, we feel like that's too much to ask our volunteers to take that step, but it's, we ask them in our orientation to let us know so that we can represent that issue, because it's happening so prevalently, and if they get whiff of it. So I just wanted to put that.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. 100%. Thank you for jumping in. And yeah, so if you're in a caring responsibility, or if you have a responsibility, a duty of care of that person, yes, your first point is your reporting line. And then these are the next resources. But if it's not, and if this is your next door neighbor, or if this is your grandparent or your parent, then these are the resources to turn to. Another really important one is legal aid. They do have a dedicated elder abuse service, and we'll be going through one of the case studies provided by them a little bit next. And there's also the Seniors Rights Service group. So their number is there as well, 1800 424 079. So some things, if you can see on the left from the Human Rights Commission, these are some of the things that it's really common for me to hear if I'm working with an older adult who is experiencing some form of abuse. So if they're treated with respect by family and friends, it's not really you know, a worry point for me. But if they, you know, if they say they don't know how their money is being spent, or if their family member is asking for money and not telling them what they're going to use it for, if they request power of attorney and things like that over their bank accounts, those are trigger points, those are warning signs. Another thing is if they have that autonomy of choice over what happens within their house. So choosing what happens within the home, or if somebody else has taken that choice from them. If their will, so again, financial and power of attorney, reflects their own wishes, or if somebody else has taken over that. And medication is a really important one as well. So if they know where their medication is, because unfortunately in some recent cases there's been you know, family members or sometimes carers not giving the medication, giving wrong medication, different doses and things like that. So there's some trigger points and warning signs. All right, so next we will discuss our final scenario, and this kind of brings us to the end of the webinar as well, which we're coming up at a good time. I do want to remind everyone that this can be distressing, can be triggering. It is a real life scenario that's been taken from the National Association of Community Legal Centres in Queensland. And the content may cause distress for some people. So if you think that it will cause distress for you because it discusses abuse and exploitation, take a break and come back in about 10-15 minutes. Otherwise, you can stay on, not skip this activity, and be included in the discussion. So I'm going to skip to the next slide, which is about the case. And I'll read it out again. So Nancy, she's 91 years old. She's frail, in poor health, and lives in her own home. 2 years ago, Nancy's son moved in with her, along with his partner and 2 adult children. Neighbours reported to police that Nancy was being subjected to verbal, financial, emotional, and physical abuse by her son and grandchildren. Police were unable to lay charges as Nancy refused to provide statements to the police. Police issued a family violence safety notice against Nancy's son, but the resulting intervention order did not prevent him from residing at his mother's home due to a lack of detail. When Nancy was admitted to hospital after a fall, nursing staff noted that her son was pressuring her for money during his visits. This was causing Nancy to feel extremely anxious and upset. She disclosed that her son had also organised for her to appear at a magistrate's court to revoke the intervention order. So what happened was, to protect Nancy from further abuse, the nursing staff contacted the elder abuse advocate at ECLC. So ECLC is the Eastern Community Legal Centre. It's also equivalent of legal aid here in New South Wales. This was in Queensland. And they also contacted Nancy's case manager and connected her with another local service. So this was for like a support worker. So what the legal centre did was recommended a joint letter be submitted to the court prior to the hearing, outlining the abuse concerns by all these people. And what this resulted in was an extension of the intervention order and continued police monitoring when Nancy returned home. Ongoing collaboration between the police, the legal centre and other services had been critical to ensuring Nancy's safety and ongoing care. And at the moment, they've reported that she's happy and well. So bottom line is, it is very complex, but there are things that can be done. So I've created here a little bit of a summary of what we've spoken about today. So some of the takeaway points are that social connection as we age is very important for our emotional, mental, and cognitive well-being. So many things that it's good for. And encouraging cognitive activities helps with keeping the brain healthy. So if you're working with an older person, encourage them to be active to keep their brain functioning. Another important point is that grief and a sense of loss is normal with times of huge transition and change. So things such as retirement and redundancy. And feeling lonely may also be a normal part of the adjustment process. But depression is not a normal and expected part of coping with change. So observe for changes in behaviour or characteristics, monitor them, and then address them if you think it might be depression. And depending on your responsibilities, that might mean reporting it to your supervisor, your manager, and then them following up on that. Another thing to remember is that men are more prone to suicidal thoughts, and keep in mind that statistic, men over 85, highest risk group for taking their own life. Spirituality and religiousness are protective factors. These are really good things in older age. And lastly, elder abuse takes on many forms. So check in with the elderly person, monitor their situation, note your observations, report it and seek help, and don't wait or brush off any observations. And this other slide here is a resource sheet that Lauren's prepared.
Yeah, so I won't read through, but we will share this out after. There is further learning that you can do and some really good resources. Beyond Blue is a great organisation and has some specific resources for older people. I just want to thank Jay so much for her time today. I found that really interesting. I hope that everyone else did as well. We also just want to say thank you to all of you for your participation today. And you know, we've covered a lot of heavy topics and things that are quite serious, but I just want you to also remember that what you're doing really contributes to the positive things and the well-being of the older people that you're working with. And we heard today, you know, things even like talking and remembering stories from the past, or even things like games or learning a new skill can really make a difference. So thank you so much for not only your time today, but the time that you give to people in the community, and remember that it does make a big impact.